Good morning, members of the media, members of our viewing audience locally and across the globe on the various social media platforms, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we welcome you to the opposition's Sunday Media Press Conference, where we continue to highlight and present the opposition's views on some of the glaring, critical, and current national issues facing our country. I am Tancoo, Member of Parliament for Oropouche West and Shadow Minister for Finance. I am joined today with my colleague, Senator David Nakhid, who will discuss together with me some various issues of grave national concern. Without further ado, I would like to hereby hand over to Senator David Nakhid, who will address you now.
In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful, thank you, MP Tancoo, and we look forward, Trinidad and Tobago, to presenting you with some of the facts and circumstances that are definitely and indelibly on the minds of every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. First of all, I'd like to give some special greetings to my Islamic brothers and sisters, and indeed the entire national community, as on the advent of on Ramadan, and we are in the midst of it, 6 days into the month of Ramadan, and we give the greetings, of course, and we say, peace be to our God, most gracious, most merciful. He has no support in unity. He has no partner in divinity. Intellects fail before the core of knowing him, and even the mightiest of the mighty are tamed by his might. So the blessings and mercy of Ramadan upon all our citizens. And I say that in this light. You know, we can look at this and be very, very particular. We can be very, very sharp and verbose and even hyperbolic when we look at what happened yesterday in Har Place. Now, Har Place is not a place unfamiliar to me, not unfamiliar at all to my family. So I went to Har Place, and I think until now, judging from all reports, it is the only place, I'm the only politician, and indeed an UNC politician, who went to Har Place to see. What shocked me at Har Place was how traumatized that society is. And I think we look beyond that. We look beyond that because we have been so conditioned, and we have to tell it like it is, we have been so conditioned by the PNM that these are not our people. We say these people and that community. We don't refer to them. Let's not be hypocritical about it. We don't refer to them as our brothers and sisters, our children. So we don't recognize that these are our people who died yesterday. We say it's those people. And some of us even say, well, you know, they get what they vote for. We have all of these asinine comments and these very, very acerbic comments that we have to get away from in the national community. And we in the United National Congress, led by Kamna Prasad Bisesa, we have that empathy. And that is why I went to Har Place yesterday to see the society. And I recognize the trauma. I recognize that trauma because I've seen that trauma in Lebanon. I've seen that trauma in Lebanon in communities that have been bombed by Zionist apartheid government of Israel. I've seen the same look, a kind of zombie-like look from the community, like, what is going on here? They can't believe what they just saw or what they just experienced. 5 people killed. And let's look at these headlines. And it seems like every day we have the newspapers, the media competing for the most poignant, the most pointed headlines. Look at this, murder and mayhem. Murder and mayhem in the Guardian newspapers. I mean, and here we have the Express, Har Place horror. I mean, it's just barely 3 weeks ago. I stood on this podium and I spoke about that tragic death of Ezekiel Paria. Gunned down, murdered, dream shattered. We spoke about that. And we in the UNC further fortified by the remarks of Kamla Prasad Bisasa, we urge the government to increase patrols in these areas. We urge them. I mean, you don't need to be a Nostradamus to know how you approach these things. We have a government, basically, who is seeing now chickens coming home to roost. And although that might sound like a very self-serving statement, it is not. This is a government that has basically cut all the indices that will lead these people in these communities, our brothers and our sisters, our children who are dying daily, to come out of that situation that they find themselves in. And it has everything to do with what we call a track record of a government. And a track record, we say that, but we have to give it the specificity that it deserves. When you talk about a track record, you're talking about the historical integrity of a government. And the historical integrity of this government, this PNM government, has been piss poor in regard to these communities that now find themselves in these very tragic situations. When you talk about Harp Place, Sharford Court, My Tower, Mongdo, the zone in Tinapuna, when you talk about these places, Big Yard, Scorpion, Saganka, when you talk about these places, these are the places that the PNM has enjoyed what we know to be that privilege of not even campaigning. Who could forget Colin Bird saying, well, he hasn't campaigned and he won? Who can forget the kind of gratuitous nature that they treat with these communities? I mean, Rowley was ever so cavalier in how he speaks about these communities. You know, when we are looking in a holistic manner as to where we have reached. People already under siege. Food insecurity at an all-time high. Forget the so-called central banks figures that they like to throw out in support of the PNM. We know as a community, as a national community, we know that unemployment is rife among these young boys in these communities. I can give you figures of maybe 40, 50% in Tinapuna alone, in Mongdo. You see these figures. And then you ask yourself, what are these idle hands going to do? What are these idle hands going to do? You're going to get this. So when it's easy for Rowley to label people as miscreants and label people, okay, if there are 500 people out of 20,000, 30,000 in these communities who are basically holding these communities to ransom, terrorizing these communities with their violence, with their gangsterism, then what you Rowley are doing is akin to how CARICOM, I would say, treats Haiti. Speak about it in glowing terms sometimes. Yes, we have 500 people alone in the community, but what are you doing about it? It's akin to how the United Nations and the international community treats the Palestinians in Gaza. Yes, we feel sorry for them, but we are witnessing a genocide in front of our eyes. Rowley and this PNM government are basically doing the same. That's what they're doing. Every week they will come and speak about, yes, we're going to, what will be Rowley's and the PNM government new plan this time? I think the last time was 100 million. We'll go $100 million with the defense force to do something. We are still waiting for the details of that. And we as a national community, we take that. Because we do not see these people in Harp Place, Sharford Court as our own people. I want us to strike out this side by side we stand. That does not count for these people. And they are our people. It certainly doesn't count for the PNM. And it comes back to the historical integrity of the PNM has been so poor in regards to these communities that we have now the chickens coming home to roost. And oh boy, are they coming home. 6, 5, 4, 3. Every day, some unimaginable massacre or horror. And, you know, whether or not we have rogue elements, what we have is a rogue prime minister. Let's be clear. We might have rogue elements in the TTPS why a van wasn't there that was supposed to be there in Oxford Street, why in this SSA, why people were behaving like what they did. We have all of these things that we are ready as UNC to address. But we have to make it clear, what we have right now is a rogue prime minister. A rogue prime minister. A prime minister who feels he can speak down to the people of Trinidad and Tobago who basically employ them. We cannot continue to say as a national community, well, they get what they deserve because that is the government they voted for. No. All of us are getting what we don't deserve. Rowley is living the high life on the taxpayers' money. While people were being shut down, Rowley was in Tobago playing golf. Rowley don't care. Everybody get dead as far as Rowley is concerned. As long as he brings to Parliament how he can borrow $10 billion. Not so, MP Tancoo?
Very true.
An extra $10 billion. He can't count. We haven't seen anything he has accounted for over $500 billion in his time. $500 billion. What we have is his minions, like Foster Cummins, as one of my colleagues said, the minister of will do. Everything is I will do and I will do. Until now, we can't see anything from him. And I'll give you figures. If he doesn't know Foster Cummins, I'll give you the figures. Under the UNC, under Kamla Prasad Bisasa, we were graduating between 4,000 and 6,000 people in those special skills program. You boasting you graduating 400. There's an excess of 5,000 or more people with idle hands. You'll have to understand this. We have to understand that as a community, as a national community. What do you want to talk? Education? While we had under Tim Gopi Singh, under Kamla Prasad Bisasa, a 17,000 student pass rate, you have taken that out to 11,000. You have failures, all of you. The healthcare system, a year, 2 years to get an examination. We just saw that in the Joint Select Committee. All of these things bring those chickens home to roost. When there's a feeling of insecurity around your education, your health, your social security, your security for you and your family, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to be the feeling in those communities? People living cheek by jowl in Har Place, in Lavantil, in Beetham. What are you going to think? And we have to address those issues. When people hear Senator Nakhid all the time talking about these areas, you might think, God forbid, I'm a PNM. No, but we in the UNC recognize, in order to fix the country of Trinidad and Tobago, you have to fix the East-West corridor. You have to fix these. I mean, if I go to the doctor and I have a pain in my leg, what are you saying, Trinidad? My leg paining. I don't go to a doctor who want to fix my eyes. We have to address the places that are hurting the most and that are hurting us the most. And I want to bring it back to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. We have a Prime Minister, Keith Rowley, who, for him, PNM is winning. You hear them talk? PNM is winning, and Fitzgerald Hines. I think Dr. Kojo addressed that. But why PNM is winning, Trinidad and Tobago is losing? We are the losers. Because for you winning, is to go yesterday, Stuart Young and Foster Cummins, in Balize House and a General Council meeting, but you wouldn't find your lazy ass, Stuart Young, in your constituency to address the residents. Who put you there? Ignorantly, I might add, because you don't care about them, and you have the temerity, Stuart Young. I mean, you know, I made several references over the last couple of years to Stuart Young, and we have a saying for him in Arabic, Kalb Amir, Amir. The dog of the prince thinks he's the prince. Kalb Amir, Amir. So Stuart Young takes his cue from Keith Christopher Rowley. So when Professor Kojo came down, who's a known PNM lover, sympathizer, might add, came down and gave suggestions in our anti-crime talks. And these are very important. Let's not forget that. These are talks initiated by Kamla Prasad Bisasa. And we are in opposition. And they've been very well received by the country locally and internationally. They have been a huge success. When Professor Cudjoe came and addressed the nation, gave a 16-point plan, was very adamant in how important it is to address these, and everyone, especially government, should participate. What Rowley told him? All he said was not specific to Christopher Rowley, but who the cap fit, let them wear it. He said, check your income you have made from 2015 in relation to your salary. Let's see where that goes. Rowley, in his typical gangster style, like how he gangster Paula May Weeks and Bliss Prasad with the merit list, gangster Professor Cudjoe, come in front of a whole podium, a whole crowd of PNM sycophants, and tell Professor Cudjoe, a man whose interests, as he said, is country before party, and told him, hold you, to a laughing crowd. The kind of language that Professor Cudjoe would later describe that could lead to possible physical violence. As he said, and he said it succinctly, Professor Cudjoe. That kind of verbal violence and public vulgarity is not what is needed in the country at this point in time. That is a form of gangsterism that we are seeing from Keith Rowley and Stuart Young. So Stuart Young followed suit on Friday, as MP Tancoo was telling me. Stuart Young, in response to a long-standing member of the financial community, Ronald Harford, Republic Bank, one of our largest bank, who made very, very accurate statements about oil and gas. You know, Stuart Young and Rowley run all over the place. They want to deal with crime, they want to deal with the failing health sector, failing education sector, crumbling infrastructure, worse roads in the Western Hemisphere. They want to deal with that. They're running all over the place, telling us they're doing something oil and gas. We didn't see a thing yet. The masters of, we will see, or we doing. And Young, this 2x4 Minister of Energy, this 2x4 politician, this clown masquerading as a minister, comes to the public and tell them, no, oil and gas doing well, we have something in the works. They have something in the works 9 years. Is the same promise they give to David Abdullah and Roger, all of them. Petrochin is yours. Election coming. I hear they're trying to do the same thing right now again. That is why the trade unions are silent. They can't find a voice. So Stuart Young come under parliamentary privilege and gangster Ronald Harford at Trini. But they saw with their racial insanity. Because he gangster him, because maybe he's a white Trinidadian. Because he know if he come around with anybody else like that, he'll get it. And he's a coward. In Parliament, he said it. Ronald Harford said, the oil and gas sector, we're not seeing anything going on with that. It is failing if it hasn't failed. And he come and tell the country about Ronald Harford. As soon as somebody is a former anything, he's got a big mouth. He wasn't elected. He lose. Embarrass the man. Only because his concern is about Trinidad and Tobago. And he has recognized, like so many of us, who want to speak and who have the courage to speak, like the UNC, like Kamala Prasad Bisesa. He has recognized that our country right now is not going down the rabbit hole. We're right down at the bottom of the rabbit hole. Oil and gas, nothing. They haven't produced one thing in 9.5 months. So you come and embarrass a citizen of the country who was a long-standing member of the banking community. You embarrass him to the point where basically you are sending a message to all those citizens of Trinidad and Tobago who would like to speak their mind of where we are. Because we're in a state of anarchy. Don't tell me we're heading towards anarchy. We're in a state of anarchy. Financial, social, economic. Nothing on the horizon except the promises of one who take his eye off the ball in every area of governance, but his eye on the ball in plantation in Tobago. And we have to call this out for what it is, Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, I could come up here every week and hold up papers in my hand, murder mayhem, and then you all go back at home, cry and lament for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and we go about our daily lives. But what country are we creating? Not only for those affected by this crime, because I go back again to what I saw in that community in her place. Tell Stuart Young, with all the talk he have for Ronald Harford, tell him go down in her place. If he's such a good representative, tell him go down by himself. Tell him walk in her place by himself if he's such a good representative. We mightn't see him. And he knows that. And Rowley knows that. All of them. So all of them, they know. And I go back, Trinidad and Tobago. Where do we not only lay that blame, but how do we go forward? Well, as far as the crime is concerned, the UNC stood in that gap. And let me tell you how difficult it was for the UNC to stand in that gap. Under our system, we basically have no power of resources. We do have the power of voice. And I think despite some of the media, and despite some of the personalities within the media trying to mask that and say we're not hearing from the UNC, if you're not hearing from the UNC, something wrong with you. Kamala Prasad Bisasa be leading this fight together with our DPLs, Munilal and Jolene John, and all our rank and file members. We have been bringing it every week to you. The deficiencies, the intellectual bankruptcy of this government in every sphere. We have been bringing it to you live, like we bring it to you today. But it's time for you to take up that baton when we bring it to you. So when Kamala Prasad Bisasa put on these crime talks, she invited who? The Prime Minister. The Prime Minister obviously has no interest in whether you dead, I dead, any little black boy dead, any little Indian boy dead. He doesn't care. He has shown that to us. And that's why I come back again to historical integrity. When you see the integrity they have historically, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? If the people of Har Place and Sharford Court haven't looked at their conditions over the last 62 years under this PNM government, you think they know? The people of Tinapuna, they don't know that Esmond Ford is a buffoon. The people of St. Joseph don't know that Dial Singh is a clown and has done nothing for that constituency. They all know. Our African brothers and sisters are not ignorant. Don't get caught in that narrative. They're very much aware. But they want to know that we care. And that is what Kamala Prasad Bisasa did with her crime talks. She showed that she cared. She cared enough to go against the grain. Bring people from outside. Alan Chastanet. What a thought. What a forward-thinking, innovative idea. She brought a regional leader and put him in her crime talks in Trinidad, addressing what? Addressing the black youth of Trinidad and Tobago. This white Caribbean leader. So Rowley and they couldn't stomach that. They couldn't stomach that because they have no interest. They have no interest in addressing their own, what they would like to call their own, but we know, and I know, because my family from Picton, that PNM has no interest. They want to keep that voter bank mainly as cannon fodder for the 1% businesses. And I'll say no more on that. Because we are in the UNC, we are not against the private sector, but the private sector has to speak up. It will not happen if we alone in the UNC speak up, or people in her place or in Sharford Court, they speak up, or in East Dry River, my Auntie Twiggy. No. Who has to speak up? The people in Westmoreland, Goodwood, down in Carnage, Blue Range. Because this is your country, as Ronald Harford showed. He was brave enough to speak up. Okay. 2x4, Stuart Young, come out and criticize him, blaze him. But I know that will not deter Ronald Harford. because he said, this is my damn country. I love that. And all of us, we have to adopt that line that Ronald Harford said, this is my damn country. And I do not like what I am seeing from this government. And I demand better. They are living on our taxpayer dollar. I demand better. That is basically what Mr. Harford said. Doesn't matter what Rowley could come and say, Holyo, or you can't talk. Doesn't matter. This government not only must go, but they must go now. So people of Trinidad and Tobago, there's nothing that happens in silos in a country. There's nothing. When you see all that is happening with SSA, there's one common thread. I want you to keep this in mind. There's one common thread. And you know what that thread is? Keep Christopher out. The statement made by certain intelligence officials in SSA were precisely this. We have been warning the government for several months about what has been happening in the SSA. And they were ignored. They were ignored. Because Keith Rowley is just not interested in proper governance. I'm waiting, as I said to you, what reaction they will have to what happened in her place. How much millions they will come and profess they want to spend in those areas of those communities, but they can't. We go back to historical integrity. They don't have the ideas. Look at their track record. They do not know how to fix. If you cannot fix a community, just one, after 62 years, you're going to come and try and fool the public before an upcoming election that you can fix it after a year? You don't have the ideas, Keith Christopher Rowley. You don't have the personnel. You cannot tell me Stuart Young is a Minister of Energy. Stuart Young is a dunce. And a noted dunce. You have to have people like we had who know about the energy industry. We have to have people who know about education, building 106 schools. You have to have people who know about sport, building the infrastructure and encouraging programs and policies. So when Shamfa Kajo comes and talk about a small goal competition here and small goal competition there, that is not policy. That is not program. We had those under the UNC. And that's why crime was down. It's all interrelated. So I'm calling upon all major stakeholders. All right now. The UNC is calling upon all. Whether they be trade unions, Chamber of Commerce, all of them. You have to lend your voice as Ronald Harford did. You have to call this government out. You have to let the people know it's time for this government to know they have failed. Rowley is a failure. I don't need to tell people in Trinidad and Tobago that. How you know a coach is a failure? By the team he puts out, they lose. That's how you know. I can call them up and down the country. All of them, failures. And if we are to address this crime, this scourge of crime that has taken place in the country, where we're going to keep seeing these headlines, we have to address it in the manner that the UNC will do, did, and intend to do again when we come into government. It has to be holistic, targeted, specific, not talk. Not talk. And that is why Kamala Prasad Bisasa took that bold initiative of the crime talk. I come back to that. Crime talks that until now, Keith Christopher Rowley has not attended. Has no interest in attending. Call it a puppy show. That puppy show, Keith Christopher Rowley, is biting the asses of every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago right now. As we look at these horrific murder scenes that take place every single week, if not every day. I urge the people of Trinidad and Tobago, as we go forward, to pay attention to the policies and programs that we advocate on all sectors. Again, we urge the government to increase patrols, not only of the police, but of the defense force in those areas, those crisis areas. Not for locking down those communities or brutalizing those communities, but protecting those communities. Those are our people. They enjoy their community life as much as we do. in whatever area we live, whether it be Goodwood or Westmoreland, they enjoy their life. And they do it with a smile on their faces. I saw their circumstances yesterday. We asked the government to insist upon it, that they protect those communities until they can sort out the social injustice that leads to these horrendous crimes. Trinidad and Tobago, I thank you for your time this morning. I urge you, all of you, to lend your voice, put your hand in hand with the United National Congress as we seek to do what this government clearly cannot do, is correct the wrongs that are plaguing our society at this point in time. And I thank you so much for your time. I would like to introduce you now to MP Tancoo, who will give you a comprehensive analysis of our financial situation as regards to property tax. MP?
Thank you very much, Senator Nakhid. Allow me to begin by endorsing the clarion call made by Senator Nakhid for the population of Trinidad and Tobago to stand up and be counted before it is too late. We are already on the brink. Individuals are being suffered on a daily basis. Stand up and be counted. Let your voices be heard. Ladies and gentlemen, today is Sunday, 17th of March, 2024. In the last few days, Trinidad and Tobago has been reeling under a multiplicity of happenings which undeniably confirm to the ordinary, intelligent, objective citizen about the magnitude and the rapidity with which this government, either nonchalantly oblivious or clearly confused, clueless, hapless, and helpless, continues to fail spectacularly, dismally, and miserably, accelerating downhill at warp speed. My colleague, Senator Nakhid, spoke about the state of crime in this country. He spoke about the headline today. The headlines in every newspaper said basically the same thing. Murder, mayhem, murder, mayhem. Tens of persons killed. It's now become a normal thing for bodies to be found behind homes, in forests, etc., etc. Bones. The murder rate is ridiculous. 119 persons have been murdered after just 77 days. And the most gut-wrenching news is that another 10 lives were snuffed out, wantonly lost just yesterday. Recently, children had to be ducking bullets, innocent bystanders being slaughtered, children being shot at directly, some as young as 4 years, murders in their beds. And the Minister of National Security, as usual, is in a state of status. He has nothing to add, nothing to subtract, nothing to multiply, nothing to divide. His lips are sealed, ladies and gentlemen. And that is not surprising, as he has already made it categorically clear that as far as he's concerned, his job is not about protecting you, your lives, and your property. Another government minister forced to respond because the issue falls squarely under her ministry, but anxious to make news without any information, common sense, or discretion, amazingly launched into and roundly blamed residents of Butu Road in Valsayn in the unfolding story of the horror faced by little children, totally ignoring the statements by these very same residents that they have been making continuous complaints to the relevant state authorities, and nothing was done. Another more recent issue, ladies and gentlemen. 5 weeks and counting. 5 weeks and counting after a tug and barge entered Trinidad and Tobago waters undetected by any security agency, resulting in an oil spill that has severely affected and afflicted Tobago and several of our Caribbean neighbors. It bothered the Prime Minister so much that he declared it a national emergency. He promised to leave no stone unturned to find the perpetrators and bring them to justice. Yet 5 weeks later, more than a month afterwards, there is no information in the public domain. Not a single person has been held to account for the millions and millions of losses and damages faced by Tobago and by other Caribbean countries. Ironically, this entry under clandestine conditions happened just days after the Prime Minister publicly said that he had information that international criminals were eyeing Trinidad and Tobago for the conduct of criminal activities. Today we know why. Criminals have discovered that there's a major security breach on our nation's borders and that nothing has been done about it for the last 9 years. If you want to know, ladies and gentlemen, how the guns, drugs, human trafficking, illegal bunker fuel and contraband are flowing in and out of this country, ask the Prime Minister and his Minister of National Security why, after 9 years, any and every boat, ship, trawler, tanker, pirogue, barge, human beings, drugs, guns, and contraband can enter and leave the waters of this sovereign country, and our national security apparatus remains blissfully unaware. The question, ladies and gentlemen, that should be on everyone's lips is why this has been allowed to happen. But it is not only our security apparatus that has failed. It is not only that. The entire security system, the entire Ministry of National Security, headed by Fitzgerald Hines, the entire National Security Council that has been run and directed specifically by the Prime Minister has collapsed. We would have seen, as my colleague mentioned, the ongoing saga of the SSA, which reportedly is the premier intelligence agency dealing with crime and anti-crime activities, and the allegations of all sorts, including that high government officials were under surveillance by this anti-crime agency. This development, the compromising of the SSA by the Prime Minister's direct intervention, the compromising of the SSA by the Prime Minister's refusal to act, especially given what my colleague just mentioned, especially given that he was warned publicly and privately before. These developments have compromised a lot of the cases under the purview of the SSA, especially given that now a man that has been handpicked by Rowley and the PNM government is now directing the operations of this agency. I repeat, ladies and gentlemen, that this government has collapsed in office. The signs are everywhere. Just a few days ago, we had the property tax fiasco, where several district revenue officers posted notices on their walls, on their doors, that said that payment of property tax was suspended with immediate effect. Social media was ablaze with the information, with many calling for clarification. Chaos ensued. Would you believe, ladies and gentlemen, that it took the Minister of Finance 24 hours to finally respond by making a statement in the Parliament and the laying of a bill which makes some changes to the legislation? But I will come to that. But by that time, social media had gone viral. Trinidad and Tobago residents, homeowners, were in a state of panic and confusion. But instead of clearing up the chaos, what the minister's statement in Parliament actually revealed was the complete mess that currently exists in terms of the implementation of this PNM hate tax, this property tax. Let me say at the outset that despite the crime tsunami threatening the lives of every citizen and the government turning a blind eye to the border security of this country, this PNM administration is in the process of committing one of the biggest crimes against the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago with this property tax. The entire country will feel the brunt of this unfair, unjust, biased PNM property hate tax. It will lead to greater suffering of a people who have already endured a substantial fall in their quality of life since Imbert, Hines, and Rowley have been in government for almost 9 years. The property tax is a crime, and we must not stop agitating against it until we scrap the tax. In the first place in his statement, on Friday gone, the minister stated decisively that contrary to the notices that had been posted up, there was no suspension of the payment of property tax. And then, moments later, in the same speech, he announced that there was, in fact, a suspension of the payment of property tax. Perhaps worse than that, he went ahead and he threw the blame on unknown public servants under the Ministry of Finance. Now, everybody knows that no public servant will put up a notice like that arbitrarily, saying tax collection is suspended without instruction.
True.
Everybody knows that. And it didn't happen in one office, it happened in multiple offices at the same time. The minister claimed that he did an investigation, but instead of holding someone to account for the chaos and madness and mayhem that occurred as a result, his preference, the Minister of Finance's preference, instead of holding somebody to account, was to cast aspersion and blame against all the public servants in the Ministry of Finance. In one fell swoop, throw them all under a P&M PTSD bus. Easy like Sunday morning. That is despicable, because we do not believe him. Who is the senior official that informed the members of staff of these various district revenue offices? Who is the senior official that provided that instruction that that notice should be put up? No secretary putting that up. That had to have come from a senior official of the Ministry of Finance. The minister has an obligation to clear the names of all the public servants who obviously just followed an instruction, most likely from someone in the office of the Minister of Finance. But that is not all. That is not all. On Friday, we learned as well, by the way, that a critical component of the P&M hate tax was missing. It was missing. For years it has been missing, and it dealt specifically with those persons who could not afford to pay the tax that is being rammed down the throats of residents, persons who are property, homeowners in this country. So this tax and borough minister was hurriedly implementing the tax, hungry for money, but did not even consider the poor persons who could not or would not be able to pay this tax. Although Minister Imbert recognizes and admitted that there will be circumstances in which persons would not be financially be able to afford to pay the tax on their property, maybe because they were pensioners living on fixed incomes, or infirmed, or unemployed, for example, Imbert had no interest in waiving a tax that would be affecting those persons, even though he admitted that they would not have been able to pay the tax. Instead, ladies and gentlemen, the minister made provision. He said that they could apply for a deferral under Section 23 of the Parent Act, the Property Tax Act. Those persons then in financial duress, those persons in financial difficulty, would have to provide documents to justify that they were poor. They had to prove that they were poor and unable to pay the tax. Would you believe, ladies and gentlemen, that the very provisions to facilitate those poor persons who were unable to pay the tax was never put in place? Would you believe that, ladies and gentlemen, the regulations that will create the space for poor people to apply for the deferral that the minister has been promising for years, since 2017, since 2018, minister has been promising that this deferral was available. He implemented the tax. He put a penalty on people if they did not comply. He had 1 month to object, ladies and gentlemen. and the opportunity for those persons who were financially unable to pay this property tax was denied them. It did not happen. They did not put it in place. What shamelessness is this, ladies and gentlemen? What callous disregard for the poor? So for almost 9 years, this PNM administration has been frothing at the mouth to put the legislation in place, but they left out deliberately the critical protection for the least among us, the very persons who need our support most, those who could not afford to pay the tax. This is heartless and absolutely shameful. The regulations are only now going to be laid in Parliament on Monday, that's tomorrow. Only now going to be laid in Parliament. The minister implemented the tax so long ago. Only now it's going to be put in Parliament. For this government, poor people are not even an afterthought. Not even an afterthought. For the PNM, the poor simply does not exist. So when the minister comes to the Parliament and tells you, ladies and gentlemen, like as he said in his statement on Friday, that he listened to the views of the public and that is why he is bringing this legislation, that is absolutely untrue. And I'll deal with that some more. But can you imagine that these financially challenged persons, retirees, people who have given their life of service to the country, pensioners, handicapped, unemployed, receiving a property tax assessment in the mail and trying to find out where they could apply for the deferral that the Prime Minister promised them 8-9 years ago, that the Minister of Finance promised them 8 and 9 years ago, only to find out that he never put it in place. Never put it in place. The man implemented again. The man implemented an incomplete law. Incomplete. It's not able to be executed. But we have seen that before, ladies and gentlemen. A few years ago, when he illegally began advertising deadlines. You remember that? He illegally advertised deadlines for submission with threats of massive fines and criminal prosecution if people did not file. It was Kamla Prasad Bisesa, senior counsel, who put on her court clothes and led the team which took him on and beat him in court. Last week, the MP for Barataria Samoa, this very platform, revealed as well that not just has the system not been put in place, but the valuation tribunal gives you the opportunity to object to the Commission on Valuations assessment. That valuation tribunal has not yet been appointed either. So two of the critical components which allow citizens some level of protection from this PNM hate tax have been deliberately left out by this minister. Having been caught out, he is now rushing to plug a few of these gaps when any sensible minister, any minister with common sense would have done that, would have gotten it right before implementation of the legislation. In his statement last Friday as well, Minister Bo said that, and I quote, a responsible government, the PNM, had listened to the concerns of the population and acted. But what is the truth? The truth is, if they had listened to the population, if he had listened to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, there would be no property tax. Imbert outlined, he said as much, he said that there were many objections. He interestingly did not reveal the number of objections, but he said that there were many objections by persons. And in almost every case, from what he provided, from the information he provided to the Parliament on Friday, on almost every case, the objections centered upon the annual rental value. Not just the rate of taxation, not just the 2% and the 3% and the 6% and the 1%, not that. It was the objections were focused on the annual rental value. According to Imbert, there were 5 major items of objection. And I want to refer them to you because it's important. First, he said that there have been, and I quote, that there have been several cases of feedback indicating that the annual rental values identified in the valuation notices are not consistent with the expectations of the property owners or with the current property rental market. I will deal with this some more in a few minutes. Secondly, and I quote again, some residential landowners and occupiers in close proximity to each other have complained about discrepancies in the annual rental values that appear illogical to them. This is not my words, ladies and gentlemen. These are the words of the Minister of Finance. Thirdly, other residential landowners and occupiers have complained about what they consider to be the obscure manner through which some of the annual rental values have been determined. You would notice, ladies and gentlemen, that those three items, the top three that the minister mentioned, in all three of them, the areas of objection centered around the method of calculation of the very basis of the assessment, that is, the annual rental value. Immediately after the minister presented his statement in Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, I was entitled to one question to the minister for elucidation. I asked the minister if any consideration, based on what he had said, if any consideration was being given to changing the basis of calculation, changing the basis of the assessment, away from the annual rental value, since this was the major cause of concern. Do you know what his answer was? The minister dismissively said, completely ignored the population's concern, and told me, in response to my question, and told me that he had given the population 6 months within which they can object. He has given no consideration at all to changing the method of assessment. Just like that, the minister identified the concerns of the population and totally dismissed them, ignored them completely. Another area of concern was that, so this is area number 4, that there was some, and I quote, there was some duplicate valuation notices that have been issued to residential landowners. You know what the minister did about that in the legislation? Not a single thing. Made no reference to it at all. He completely ignored it. Identified it as a problem, but provided no solution. According to the minister as well, the last set of objections came from people who felt that the property tax should have been based on the old ARV, under the old land and building taxes. Now, obviously, ladies and gentlemen, there was no annual rental value under the old land and building taxes. What existed was what is called an annual rateable value, which is completely different. Completely different. It's a completely different method of calculation to Imbert's annual rental value. And the minister knows this, but he chose to obfuscate the difference. Why? The fact is that this population has been consistently objecting to the use of the annual rental value as the basis for taxation. There's a reason for that, ladies and gentlemen. The annual rental value is based on ghost money, money that does not exist, and in many cases, valuations which are bogus. The minister got that in his complaints. The minister is aware of this. It is calculated, that's the annual rental value, is calculated on a revenue stream that the vast majority of homeowners are not receiving. It is unethical, and maybe even illegal, but it is unethical to charge someone and what is effectively an income tax when they are not receiving that income. It is as if the government has stole my property and now I have to pay them a rent. By a stroke of the pen, ladies and gentlemen, Imbert has converted a property owner into a renter of his own property. I have met, ladies and gentlemen, in the last few months, I have met with hundreds of homeowners who simply cannot understand why they have to pay a tax on revenue that they are not receiving. It is illogical, it is immoral, it is unethical, it is wrong. Worse than that, if two identical houses or apartments sitting next to each other, ladies and gentlemen, one rented and earning an income, and the other one is owner-occupied, earning no revenue, both, ladies and gentlemen, face the exact same tax liability. This is inequitable. It's wrong. The difference is that one revenue, one property, is earning a revenue, and the other is not, and they should therefore not be treated equally for the purposes of taxation. That is like charging an unemployed individual NIS and health surcharge at the same rate that you are charging an employed person. It makes no logical sense. It is discriminatory. It is discriminatory and it is wrong. By treating owner-occupied rental property, by treating owner-occupied and rental property in the same way, Imbert may have satisfied his rich friends that own rental property, but he has penalized those very persons, those hard-working citizens who live in their own homes. And that is a significant number of persons, ladies and gentlemen. If there's a problem in the calculation methodology, as specified in the complaints and the objections that the minister has already received, shouldn't that be the issue currently under legislative review? And if this is a major bone of contention for those objecting, shouldn't that have been issued a level of some kind of explanation by the minister? Instead, the minister has already ignored the vast majority of objections, completely dismissed them, but shamelessly telling the population, and I quote, this is what he said on Friday, "Indeed, the PNM government has taken stock of the various issues raised in the public domain regarding the valuation of residential properties, and as a responsible government has taken appropriate action to alleviate the concerns as the new system is being rolled out." That is an absolute lie. That is an absolute lie, and I encourage the minister to review this conversation, to review this tape, and prove me wrong. Prove me wrong, and I will come on this very same platform and apologize. Because the minister, I admitted in Parliament on Friday what the issues were, what the objections were, and he has done nothing to treat with those objections. Instead, ladies and gentlemen, he came with a mama guy. He came with a mama guy. Ladies and gentlemen, many of you are aware, because you are directly affected, that people have taken to social media to complain that the tax does not truly reflect the value of their property. Yesterday, in my own constituency of Oropouche West, I visited a home along such a trace in Pinal. The pensioner, the individual who owns the property, is a widowed pensioner who lives on the property. He's been living there for decades. It is a flat, old, wooden, unpainted house with rotted floorboards, broken windows boarded up with old plywood, with 2 bedrooms and a combined kitchen living area. He has a bathroom and a latrine blocked up around with old galvanized sheets. I have known the occupier for many years. I know him exceptionally well because since 2016, every year when the rain falls, because of the failure of the government to maintain the riverbanks in the area, his home floods with as much as 6 feet of water entering his bedroom, entering his living room, entering his kitchen, ladies and gentlemen. Would you believe that this citizen received a valuation that claims that the annual rental value of his modest home was over $108,000? That assumes that somebody would pay a rent of $9,000 per month to live in this home. The pensioner told me, ladies and gentlemen, that if Imbert and his family were willing, they could come and get him that rent, or rent that property from him for less than that. And he would be able to appreciate that revenue and live in comfort. Ladies and gentlemen, everybody is familiar with this photo by now. Everyone will be familiar with this photo by now. It has been posted all over the internet. It is a photograph that was on the front page of the Newsday of March 15th, 2024, 2 days ago. 2 days ago. According to Imbert, this man's property at Tancoo Lane in San Fernando would be able to fetch an annual rent of $96,264. That is a monthly rent, ladies and gentlemen, of $8,022. I visited this house yesterday. Realistically, There was no way that anyone would rent this property for $8,000 a month. Take a look at it. There's no way. But that is exactly what Imbert and his trainee evaluators have determined the property to be valued. That is what he believes that people should pay their property tax based on. It is impractical. It is wrong, ladies and gentlemen. These valuations are being done willy-nilly, arbitrarily, and property owners are being asked and demanded under threat of persecution and criminalization to pay the tax royals. You know, if these are the persons determining the rental value for properties rented by government, from persons including government ministers, then heaven help us. Heaven help us. You cannot have untrained persons driving past a house and estimating property value. That is simply not done. And these are not isolated cases, ladies and gentlemen. Most of the persons who I have spoken to have indicated that the ministry's assessments are exceptionally overvalued. This may not be accidental, because a higher value means a greater tax take. And given the minister's desperation to pick the pockets of residential property owners, I would put nothing past him. But for these two homeowners, having to pay a new, unforeseen, unpredicted tax under pain or penalty of being made criminals, having to pay this tax out of their meager pensions, literally means they're not giving up food, medicine, or some other basic necessity of life. When you add the impending increase in water rates and electricity rates and the continuously rising food prices, this new tax is an excessive and oppressive weight placed on the necks of citizens by this uncaring, cruel tax and borrow government. Despite the obvious public dissatisfaction with the value of the assessments, stated by the objections, ladies and gentlemen, the persons who wrote to the ministry, who used the opportunity to tell the minister if he didn't know, Imbert has done nothing about it. He has placed the burden back on the population to spend money to explain and justify why their assessments are rubbish. He expects these poor persons, these individuals, to justify why his property can't earn $8,000 a month if somebody rents it. I maintain that this is an ill-conceived tax, poorly implemented, inequitable, and on the backs of citizens to pay for your minister, for your inability to manage the money of this country. Today I want to ask the Real Estate Association, does a valuation done by a professional department in the Ministry of Finance, signed off and approved by the Minister of Finance, does that valuation have any reality in today's real estate market? Ladies and gentlemen, this is an open criminal abuse of citizens. There are a couple other issues I want to touch with before I close, ladies and gentlemen. I have indicated that the minister has advised that they are now going to put the regulations in place to facilitate persons who are unable to pay the assessed value of the tax and are therefore seeking a deferral. Just to repeat, a deferral is not a waiver. If you cannot pay your tax today, the minister expects that he will keep checking on you. If you cannot pay the tax today, he will keep checking on you, and at some point in time, somebody, whoever takes over the property, will have to pay all of that tax. In fact, in the current circumstances, it is an inheritance tax. Because the person who ends up inheriting the property inherits the accrued taxes and interest accumulated over time. So it appears that the government is using a reverse mortgage template, and upon your death, your heirs are simply left to hand over the keys of your property, or keys of your home, to Rowley and Imbert. When this was raised in the public domain by the political leader of the United National Congress, the Honorable Kamala Prasad-Bisesa, the Minister of Finance rubbished the claim. He said this was absolutely untrue. The government has no interest, no intentions of establishing an inheritance tax. Today we see the truth. A rose by any other name is still a rose. But what is even more disturbing is the mindset of Colin Imbert and his government. Imbert shamelessly claims that persons who would have qualified as poor and infirm and unable to pay the property tax, many of them have rich children who are lawyers, etc. So these persons who now have to convince the government that they are poor, that they cannot afford to pay the property tax, they are living in distressed conditions. These persons, the minister is saying, have very rich children, rich children, who will be able to pay the property tax whenever the deferral period ends. What rubbish from the mouth of a desperate government replete with economic quacks and invalids. Incompetence to the extreme. Ladies and gentlemen, these are persons. These persons who are asking for deferral. These are persons who would have had to apply for a deferral, be assessed and evaluated, be made to jump through the multiple hoops, all the hoops that the minister could come up with, and then be deemed to be financially unable to pay the level of taxation. And this is repeated every 2 years because this minister thinks that people will put themselves in this level of continuous squalor and poverty just to deny him his blood tax. He stoops to maligning the character of citizens, ladies and gentlemen. I want to repeat that to make the point clear. This Minister of Finance stoops to maligning the characters of citizens who are unable to pay the overvalued property tax. This P&M hate tax. What a shame! What a shame. With a stroke of the pen, Imbert and Rowley are making tax-paying citizens, are making decent citizens who are challenged by economic conditions. With a stroke of the pen, Imbert and Rowley are making those persons into criminal liable, subject possibly to criminal interrogation. But he's not the only one with this corrupted mindset, this sick mindset. The Prime Minister was on record as saying that, and I quote, "The vast majority of voices that you hear attacking property tax in Trinidad and Tobago are voices that have property outside of Trinidad and Tobago." This is absolutely untrue, and I challenge the Prime Minister to provide the evidence that determined what he said. Provide the evidence of your claim, ladies and gentlemen. Provide the evidence, Mr. Prime Minister. Let the population see that you know what you are saying, and what you are saying is backed by evidence, is backed by fact, because we know that you cannot, because it is patently untrue. But it shows this government's deliberate intention to attack to the point of shaming any person who has legitimate objections or who are unable to pay the property tax because of their financial situation. That is a despicable act. That is an act of a government that is dictatorial and is desperate to shut down anybody who dares to speak up and speak out. Like my colleague mentioned with regards to this businessman, who his only failing in the eyes of Stuart Young and his government is that he called for the government to be held accountable. Again, ladies and gentlemen, on Friday, the minister said that 801 persons had already paid the property tax at the current rates with a value of just over $1 million. He committed on Friday that all of these persons will be issued new tax notices based on the new rate and will be refunded. Now, while no indication has been given as to when they will receive the refunds and what interest they will be paid, if any, I wish to remind individuals, these very 801 individuals, that this is the same Minister of Finance who has businesses begging for VAT refunds for years. Businesses have closed down, their cash flow compromised, while the minister plays Russian roulette with their livelihoods, determining at his whim and fancy who to pay and when to pay them. You cannot trust this minister to do the right thing even when it is obvious. From an economic point of view, ladies and gentlemen, homeowners have also told us that the P&M property tax, this hate tax, penalizes penalizes people for investing in property. What the government should have been doing, what any decent government would do, any proactive government, any visionary government, any government with sense, ladies and gentlemen, what they would be doing is creating an environment to encourage investment. For most persons, your home is your single largest investment. And in many cases, it takes years and in some cases, generations to complete. Your private home is not a revenue generating. It's not revenue generating. It is a cost item because you have to, on a regular basis, engage in upkeep and maintenance to keep the value of your home constant, to keep your comfort going. That is not a revenue generating activity. It is a cost incurring activity, ladies and gentlemen. Minister doesn't care about that because he's charging you a tax as if you are earning an income on that property that you are living in. Economists have also told us that the tax is also a disincentive to home improvement because simple exercises like putting up a fence or burglar proofing to protect your family from this runaway crime facilitated by this government, or even painting your house, will increase the value of your home and will simultaneously attract the jaundiced, big-eye attention of the Minister of Finance. Simply painting over my home or tiling my floor will increase the value and then the annual rental value. So homeowners are hesitant to invest in improving their own homes for fear of being penalized. This is a punitive P&M tax against anyone with any level of ambition. It is a shame. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to turn to some of the things that the minister has been silent on. In preparing for this press conference, I reviewed the Minister of Finance's website, and I was reminded painfully of the minister's notices as he pursued this P&M hate tax. Last year, Minister Imbert advised that 232,000 residential properties were already established, were already prepared for the valuation rule. Recent estimates are that there are some 425,000 households in Trinidad and Tobago. This would have obviously grown over the years. That figure was based in 2020, and for the last 4 years, I know that they would have had more additions to the number of households in this country. But what that means is by the middle of last year, there were at least 193,000 residential properties not on this valuation list. At the time, that is middle of last year, the deadline for submission of completed property assessment tax forms had passed. So even if there were late entrants, and if I'm to be generous, let's say 93,000, and pay attention to the numbers, ladies and gentlemen. Let's say 93,000 who had submitted their forms and were in some form of processing, etc. It would mean, ladies and gentlemen, that at least 100,000 residential properties that did not submit property tax assessment returns to the Commissioner of Valuations are now facing the attention of the Minister of Finance. 100,000 residential properties that are not included in the valuation rule, 100,000 properties that are not filled out their forms at the deadline time that was established by the Minister. And I repeat that this is a conservative estimate. I caution, because the Minister has been quiet about it. But we know we cannot trust this Minister. According to several documents published by the Ministry of Finance, and several of them, I want to refer one here, a media release by the Ministry of Finance on January 31st, 2022. And it says, and I want to quote, under Section 32 of the Valuation of Land Act, failure to comply with this requirement, that is to submit the return, failure to comply with this requirement constitutes a criminal offense which is punishable by a fine of $5,000. End of quote. They are running full steam ahead, but the Minister of Finance has not stated yet what will happen to the persons who had not filed. That's 100,000 homes at least who had not filed by the deadline provided. Or what would happen to those persons whose information has provided. So these others now would have provided information to the ministry, but whose information contained errors, omissions, or were inaccurate in some form. Because according to the minister's website, according to his publications, those persons too would be liable to be subjected to criminal prosecutions. With another stroke of the pen, ladies and gentlemen, Imbert is making legitimate homeowners into criminals. The Property Tax Act, ladies and gentlemen, which we are looking at today, also makes provision for the seizure and sale of assets, including your fridge, your stove, your bed, your TV, and even your house and land whenever Imbert demands his pound of flesh. Citizens, my colleague asks you, stay alert. Stay alert. Pay attention. There's more to come. You cannot trust this minister. I expect very soon we will see substantial action against 100, a quarter of the property owners in this country. 1/4 of them, 100,000 plus persons, are going to be faced with criminal action by this government. They will be faced with criminal matters, put in court and treated like criminals, ladies and gentlemen, with a stroke of the pen by this Minister of Finance. Whether he will do it before or after election, it's coming. It's coming. As sure as night follows day, follows night, it is coming, ladies and gentlemen, because that is why the minister has been silent. The devil is always in the details, as my leader has said. As a result of this property tax, ladies and gentlemen, homeowners are already aware of increased insurance rates to come in. Persons renting too will now find themselves paying higher rents as the cost of the P&M property tax is passed on to them. To that must now be added the higher water rates, higher electricity rates. To that must also be added those things, and those very same persons are also expected to pay higher prices for food, for transportation, etc. So when the minister laughed, the prime minister laughed and says those who don't own property have no property tax to pay, he was clearly misled or is misleading. Neither is acceptable. The truth is that this flawed property tax is being rammed down the throats of citizens, and it is a vicious, punitive, and painful tax that will affect each and every single citizen of this country. There's also not been a single word said about the tax on commercial and industrial properties, which are profit-generating entities. Unlike most of the residential homeowners, unlike most of them, these commercial and industrial properties are profit-generating entities. I have not heard a single report about the valuation department issuing letters and advertisements with threats to the business community to pay property tax, or else we will make you criminals, we will criminally charge you. This is deliberate discrimination in the application of this property tax, this P&M hate tax. It's a deliberate discrimination. To tax only residential property is a desperate and deliberate attempt to squeeze blood from stone, penalizing responsible citizens who have invested in their homes but leaving out profit-generating business properties. This is parasitic behavior, ladies and gentlemen. Imbut is taken from you and not giving you anything in return. At a time when hundreds of thousands of tax-paying citizens in this country, including citizens in my constituency, are unable to get water on any regular basis, you are bringing this tax? This tax, under those circumstances, is a crime. At a time when citizens are dying waiting for emergency surgeries, this tax is a crime. At a time when vehicles are being smashed left, right, and center, you are bringing this tax? That is a crime. At a point in time when criminals are running this country, people are petrified to step out of their homes and even to stay in their own homes, you are bringing this tax? Ladies and gentlemen, you are joining, the Minister of Finance is joining those very same criminals in extorting from the population money that is not due to him on an ethical basis. It is unethical, it is discriminatory, it is wrong, it should be scrapped. But that is not the only blight, ladies and gentlemen, that Minister Imbut has given to these favored businesses that has cost this country billions of dollars in tax revenue lost by tax avoidance. ECLAC, in a recent publication entitled Navigating Transfer Pricing Risk in the Oil and Gas Sector, available online, discovered that the government's failure to pass the base erosion and profit shifting legislation deprived this country of an estimated $2.6 billion in taxes every year. $2.6 billion US dollars lost because this government refused to implement a piece of legislation that the rest of the Caribbean has already implemented. That is $17 billion per year from gas alone. This legislation would have prevented tax avoidance by multinationals. citizens would never have had to experience this kind of punishment as we are going through today. There would have been no need for the kind of borrowing of the 10 billion and the 20 billion and the 50 billion. There would have been no need to have that kind of borrowing that Imbut is doing now on the backs of citizens who will be expected to pay it later on. Citizens are being forced, ladies and gentlemen, to pay the price of the minister's misconduct, for failure to implement the legislation, and mismanagement and incompetence. Because this government, this ministry, has no intention of doing anything proactive. All their interest is in tax, sell, tax, sell, tax, 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 tax. Unacceptable. He is taking things that he'd taken from you, ladies and gentlemen. This is the minister. The minister is taking from things that he had no hand in putting in place. The Heritage and Stabilization Fund, your property. This is home invasion of another kind. And I dare say it is a government-sponsored home invasion that you should be petrified about just as much as you are petrified about criminal home invasion. This is a government-sponsored criminal home invasion. But if these businessmen think that Imbut has forgotten them, remember that he is also seeking by the legislation to be debated in Parliament on Monday. He is also seeking to give himself the power to change the dates unilaterally. And the first thing he has already done is to backdate the effective date of this legislation, of the changes in this legislation. He has already made a signal as to what he's doing. He has already backdated the legislation to January 2024. Yes, the minister is providing retroactive legislation, and he's now asking for permission to do so some more. So if these businessmen think that Imbut has forgotten them, he can backdate legislation and come to you for taxes on your property for any date that he so determines, from January 31st, before that, or after that. He has given himself the power under this new law to backdate the application of commercial and industrial property tax. And that is why it is in the legislation tomorrow. This is not the minister caring and responding to citizens. Far from it. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot more that can be said about this anti-people, discriminatory and unethical property tax. And more will be said. On multiple occasions before, the UNC, as my colleague has mentioned, the UNC has stood in the gap against the PNM and in favor of the people. And tomorrow in the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, we will continue to do so. I want to make it absolutely clear, for the reasons I have mentioned and so many more, the UNC views this tax as wrong, immoral, vindictive, ill-conceived, badly designed, and a criminal attack on the population of this country. It is a heavy-handed weapon of a failed government that has lost the confidence of the people, and they are becoming desperate. At every stage of the implementation of this PNM pay tax, this property tax, we have seen controversy, missteps, and chaos. It is no different now. The Prime Minister has openly stated that the property tax is critical, otherwise the country will be forced to go to the IMF. That is absolutely rubbish and a childish scare tactic, especially when one is aware that the estimated revenue for property tax for 2024 is going to be about $150 million. $150 million. That is what the estimated property tax take will be, as stated in the estimates of revenue 2024 provided by the very same minister. So if you don't get the $150 million, that wouldn't take you to the IMF. It is a scare tactic, ladies and gentlemen, an absolute scare tactic. But the threats and the bullying of residential property owners is not without reason. Despite all the claims of the economy doing well by the government, the facts are that revenues today are lower than the minister expected. Our foreign reserves are at its lowest that it has been since 2007. The country's output today remains substantially smaller than it was when the Minister of Finance, this Minister of Finance, assumed office 9 years ago. Oil and gas production remains lower than expected, despite all the noise from the Minister of Energy and the Prime Minister. And with an election in the air, the government is desperate for money to try to bribe the population to vote for them again. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, that the minister lowered the rate of assessment to distract the population. He lowered the rate of the assessment to distract the population from the multiple issues with regards to his use of this fake annual rental value as the basis for calculating the tax. This reduction is a temporary reprieve. But as long as the tax is based on ghost income and is discriminatory, the opposition UNC will continue to join the population of Trinidad and Tobago and fight against it. It is clear that in his desperation for campaign money, Imbert will not scrap the tax. And that is why he came to Parliament last Friday, seeking for approval to borrow $10 billion more. It's the fourth time they have given themselves space to borrow more and more, billions and billions, and spend and spend and spend with nothing to show for it. While they are borrowing and spending, the economy is dropping. Every aspect that values and assesses the quality of life in this country has gotten worse. It is telling that they provide no explanation as to the specific projects they needed to borrow to finance under the Development Loans Act. So they borrowed money and they provided no explanation as to what they are doing with it. And when businessmen and regular citizens call for accountability, the government stands up and chastises and insults. They will use the majority in Parliament, just like they did on Friday. They will use the majority in Parliament to pass this legislation. It's already there. What does, and that will simply increase the debt of the country, but what does this have to do with citizens and property tax? What does this increased borrowing and increased debt have to do with citizens and property tax? Well, I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, when Imbert borrows, it's not he that pays it back. It is citizens that have to pay it back, and that is usually via higher taxation. And that is why this property tax is a desperate attempt by the government to squeeze money out of blood. Squeeze money out of stone, squeeze blood out of stone. If Imbert is willing to drop this unethical, discriminatory P&M tax by 33%, as he said, he will have to make that up in some other way, some other form. Borrowing is unsustainable because they are borrowing to refinance loan and to engage in election spending. This does not generate sustainable revenue. The result is obvious, as is the intention. Spend now, free up now, flatter people now, spread joy now, and tax, 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 tax down the road. We already know, as I mentioned, higher utility rates are coming, higher water rates, higher electricity rates, and I predict, ladies and gentlemen, from this platform here today, remember the date? From this platform here today on the 17th of March, that soon we'll hear the government coming to the population to tell them that they have to pay higher NIS rates of contribution. That too is coming. Your income is remaining the same. Prices are going up, fees are going up, costs are going up, taxes are going up. Your wages and salaries remain the same because this government does not care that as costs go up, your real income goes down, your quality and standard of life collapses, ladies and gentlemen. Imbert thinks that this population is stupid and would not realize that his nominal reduction in property tax is a deliberate con job to deflect from the fact that this property tax, this P&M tax, is unethical, discriminatory, and is being selectively applied. He wants you not to see the problems that this tax is. So it doesn't matter whether it is 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, or whatever the percentage is. The basis of calculation of this tax is wrong. This property tax is completely illogical, irrational, unethical, and wrong, and should be scrapped. I end as I began, ladies and gentlemen. This government is committing the biggest crime against the people of Trinidad and Tobago by implementing this property tax. I call you, I join my colleague, Senator Nakhid, in calling the population of Trinidad and Tobago to stand up, speak out, join with us. Let us stop this government from abusing citizens' pockets. Let us hold this government to account. Let us demand what we are paying them to do, which is good representation. And if they cannot do the job, as they have not been able to do over the last 9 years, then it is time to call for them, ladies and gentlemen, to go. I thank you, and I look forward to your questions. If any are available, we have both Senator Nakhid and myself will be in a position to respond. Senator, join us, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions for Senator Nakhid and then for Tancoo. Senator Nakhid, you spoke about the mayhem in Harp Place. Professor Cudjoe, in today's Express, wrote, verbal violence and public vulgarity contribute as much to a climate of violence as a young man who picks up a gun to express his violent rage. Would you care to comment on that? You did mention...
Of course, I mentioned it a bit, and it's particularly relevant because we are talking about the Prime Minister of our country. When a Prime Minister of a country uses that kind of language towards any citizen, that, of course, can convert itself into physical violence. And I think that's the reference that Professor Cudjoe was referring to. And we know that Keith Rowley has been very, very, I would say, he has little disregard for how he conducts his public discourse and how he addresses the citizens of this country. It's also always in a very disrespectful and a very loutish manner. And I think he overdid himself there by what he said to Professor Cudjoe, who is a considered citizen. It doesn't matter to what party he belongs. I think it was, all the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago recognized it for what it was. And it was very, very, very out of place and inappropriate.
And another question I have for you. You mentioned the anti-crime talks. What is your view of the Prime Minister's continued refusal to sit with the opposition for these anti-crime talks?
Well, first of all, I think, given the seriousness of what is before us, we, the UNC, urge once again for Christopher Rowley as Prime Minister to join our opposition leader, our political leader, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, in these anti-crime talks. He's the head of the National Security Council, head of the government, and I think it's very important that a national unified front is presented. I think his failure to continue to neglect these anti-crime talks, it doesn't lend itself, for one, to being a Prime Minister, and two, to solving the problem of crime, which is on the minds of all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. What do you think people in Trinidad and Tobago are thinking about today, given what took place yesterday? 10 murders within 48 hours. They're on their minds in every breakfast table, in every church, every mosque, every temple today. The talk is crime. Crime, 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 as Rowley would say. But Rowley said crime, crime, crime to tell us that the opposition should not be addressing what he fails to address. So what he wanted to talk about? Golf, golf, golf? Party, 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 because that's what we're already on. So what we are going to stick with it. Our political leader has been determined in our efforts, and they've been very fruitful, as we've said. And we look forward to Keith Rowley not having a change of heart for us, but for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, because they're looking forward to that unified front as we go forward in addressing the crime situation.
All right. Okay, and I have some questions for MP Tancoo. You mentioned, you asked a question about the person who gave the instruction to suspend the property tax. Will you be filing a question or asking the Parliament questions on that?
I have challenged the Minister of National Security publicly. Challenged him publicly. If he cannot say it publicly, then he should not be saying it at all. And I challenge him to stop hiding behind X. Stop hiding behind the use of Twitter. Get involved now. Provide the information now. If your name man, come public. Say it out loud.
Another question I have is, can you expand on the difference between the annual rental value and the annual rateable value?
So the annual rental value is based on this false notion that properties, residential properties, are generating an income. We have seen that the method of calculation is arbitrary. It makes no sense. There's no system in place. The annual rateable value, which was built what the old land and building taxes was based on, is a system of calculation that is based on the property assessments themselves. the real true value, not a rental value that does not exist. It is the value of the property itself. That is the difference. It's a critical difference because it establishes where you are not earning an income from your property, you are not going to be penalized as if you are. It treats with each individual property specifically and separately, not like what they are doing now, which is bunching properties together, whether you are earning an income or whether you are owner-occupied property. So that's the difference between the two.
You mentioned that over 100,000 persons who have not filed may be fined $5,000. Have you confirmed this?
Well, as I recited, the Ministry of Finance on their website said that if you have not filed, if you did not file your returns given the deadline date, you can be liable to summary conviction and a fine, a criminal fine of $5,000. That's on the ministry's website. I gave the calculation because the minister last year said 232,000 residential homeowners had in fact been placed on evaluation roll, but there are 425,000 homes in this country. So that means a substantial amount. I use a figure of $100,000 properties as a general. It is a very conservative estimate. And those persons are likely to be subjected because right now the law gives the minister the approval and provision to legally prosecute those persons for failure to comply. And I believe, given this minister's clandestine characteristics, that he will so do.
The final question is that considering that the property tax, if successfully collected, would generate around $100 million in revenue, how does the UNC plan to generate said funds if it gets into office and scraps the tax? Will the party consider heading to the IMF to get funds to run the country?
As I indicated earlier, there's something called the BEPS legislation, the Base Erosion and Profit Shifting legislation, which deals with preventing multinational corporations, which include the massive groups and the energy sector companies. It includes very large companies that have presence in multiple countries. If that legislation had been put in place, the government of Trinidad and Tobago would have been able to generate $17 billion at least on one sector, that's the gas sector, and there are multiple other sectors, so that they are ready, low-hanging fruit, ladies and gentlemen. All that was required and all that is required is a government who is willing to pursue true environmental development for the purposes of creating an environment where investors are willing to invest. If you want to generate money, if you want to generate businesses, even if you want to generate more tax, what you need to do is create a situation where investors are willing to come in, and that would broaden the tax base and generate substantial revenue streams for any thinking and caring government.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure. I beseech you on behalf of my colleague to remember our parting words. Stand up, speak out. Do not stay silent, ladies and gentlemen. Silence is not golden. Silence is consent. If you do not appreciate how this government is running your country, it is time to stand up and speak out. Thank you.